You ready, Pignon?
Everybody should be being muted right now. I'm ready.
Hello, everyone. We're just going to get started in just a moment. Okay, let's go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joel Whitney, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Khan Humanities Lecture featuring Amitav Ghosh, whose unique mind and voice will turn our attention to topics tonight that may seem distant and far in the past, but which bring us, as you'll see, right to our doorstep here in Brooklyn. The Khan Humanities Lecture brings to the library the heft of knowledge and talents and voices of historians and other humanities thinkers and public intellectuals who speak on such topics in the past as the Civil War and the Underground Railroad, the Constitution, the symbolism and urgency of reckoning with our public monuments, and much more. But some time back, we agreed that climate change was so urgent that with the encouragement of Betty Kahn, we added an environmental bucket to the roster of topics and speakers, with the caveat that they come at it from a new place, an unfamiliar angle via the humanities. The list of past speakers reflects this evolution, including Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Eric Foner, journalist and author Peter Beinart, and Constitution scholar Akil Reed Amar. More recent speakers include ACLU President Susan Herman, former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and climate activist and author Bill McKibben. Tonight's speaker reflects both the original framework for the series and its newer, more perhaps existential urgency. Before Linda Johnson, my colleague, introduces Amitav Ghosh and his post-talk interviewer Emily Rabateau, I want to thank our generous friend and neighbor Betty Kahn and the late Steve Kahn for making this series possible through the Kahn Endowment for the Humanities, and for so lovingly and honest-mindedly urging it to continue to evolve. I'm going to ask that you join me in your way in the Zoom room in thanking Betty and the Kahn family members who are here. Thanks, Betty. And now to launch tonight's talk, I'm happy to present Brooklyn Public Library President and CEO Linda Johnson.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Of course, as ever, I'm especially grateful to Betty Kahn and her late husband, Steve, for so generously endowing the lecture series at a public library. Brooklyn Public Library welcomes everyone that walks through our doors or enters our Zoom room for free. It's our mission to ensure that all Brooklynites have access to distinguished thinkers like the ones we're lucky enough to have with us this evening. Amitav Ghosh is an internationally celebrated novelist and nonfiction writer who has published 14 books and counting, each as distinct and ambitious as the last. His latest, The Nutmeg's Curse, poses perhaps the most urgent question of our time. What is the origin of our planetary crisis? And if we understand it, can we change its current trajectory? Amitav's work has been translated into more than 30 languages and earned numerous honors. He is the recipient of India's highest literary award, 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards, and 4 honorary degrees. After what promises to be a fascinating, if terrifying, lecture, Amitav will be joined in conversation by Emily Rabateau, whose writing, teaching, and organizing has focused on the climate emergency since 2018. A professor at City College, her 3rd book, aptly titled Caution, Lessons in Survival, is forthcoming. After the conversation, there will be an opportunity for a brief Q&A. So without further ado, please welcome Amitav. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, I hope you can all see me now. And well, it's a great pleasure to be with you. And my thanks to the Brooklyn Public Library and to the Kahn Endowment and Betty Kahn for making it possible for me to be with you today. I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, and the Brooklyn Public Library is a great resource for all of us. So it's wonderful to be talking to you all in Brooklyn today. So what I'm going to do is, my talk is a PowerPoint. So I need to share my screen with you now. There we are. Can you all see the screen? Is it okay? I can't hear you. Yes, okay, great. My story begins almost exactly 400 years ago in a very faraway place, so far away that very few of you are likely to have heard of it. That place is the Banda Archipelago, a tiny cluster of islands in the far southeastern quadrant of the Indian Ocean. The largest of these islands is only 2.5 miles in length and 0.5 mile in width. So minuscule are the Banda Islands that on most maps they are marked only as a sprinkling of dots. The Banda Islands sit upon a fault line where the earth shows itself to be palpably alive. The islands and their volcanoes are the offspring of the ring of fire that runs from Chile in the east to the rim of the Indian Ocean in the west. A still active volcano, Gunung Api, of Fire Mountain, towers above the Bandas, its peak perpetually wreathed in plumes of swirling cloud and upwelling steam. Gunung Api is one of a great number of volcanoes in this stretch of ocean. The surrounding waters are dotted with beautifully formed conical mountains that surge majestically out of the waves, some of them rising to heights of over 1,000 meters or more. The very name of the region, Maluku, which gave birth to the English toponym Moluccas, is said to derive from Moloko, a word that means mountain or mountain island. The mountain islands of Maluku often erupt with devastating force. Yet there is also something magical about these convulsions, something akin to the pain of childbirth. For the eruptions of Maluku's volcanoes bring to the surface alchemical mixtures of materials which interact with the winds and weather of the region in such a way as to create forests that teem with wonders and rarities. In the case of the Banda Islands, the gift of Gunung Api was a botanical species that has flourished on this tiny archipelago like nowhere else, the tree that produces both nutmeg and mace. The nutmeg is a venturesome traveler. How much so is easy to chart, simply because every single nutmeg in the world originated in or around the Banda Islands before the 18th century. So it follows that any mention of the nutmeg in any text anywhere before the 1700s automatically establishes a link with the Bandas. In Chinese texts, those mentions date back to the 1st century before the Common Era. In European texts, the nutmeg appears a century later, which suggests that it had already been in circulation across Europe, Africa, and Asia from long before that time. Of this, there can be no doubt at any rate that the nutmeg had traveled thousands of miles across the oceans long before the first Europeans reached Maluku. It was these journeys that ultimately brought European navigators to Maluku. They came because plant products like nutmeg and clove had already traveled in the other direction long before them. Apart from their culinary uses, nutmegs, mace, and other spices were valued also for their medical properties. In the 16th century, the value of the nutmeg soared when doctors in Elizabethan England decided that the spice could be used to cure the plague, epidemics of which were then sweeping through Eurasia. Nutmegs became so valuable in Europe that a handful could buy a house or a ship. What made nutmegs and mace the object of such intense desire? Like many other spices, they have some remarkable properties, but contrary to modern myth, they did not owe their desirability to their preservative properties. The commonest of household ingredients, salt, is actually a far more effective preservative. Why then did these culinary condiments come to be so greatly valued? The answer is simple, because spices connoted luxury, because only the affluent and powerful could afford them. In the late Middle Ages, nutmegs reached Europe by changing hands many times, at many points of transit. The latter stages of their journey took them through Egypt or the Levant to Venice, which ran a tightly controlled monopoly on the European spice trade in the centuries leading up to the voyages of Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama. Columbus himself was from Genoa, where Venice's monopoly on the Eastern trade had long been bitterly resented. It was in order to break the serene republic's hold on the trade that navigators set off on the journeys that led to the Americas and the Indian Ocean. Among their goals, one of the most important was to find the islands that were home to the nutmeg. The stakes were immense for the navigators and for the monarchs who financed them. The spice race, as Timothy Morton says, was the space race of its time. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to reach the Banda Islands in 1511, but others followed hot on their heels. First the Spanish, then the Dutch, and the English. What the Europeans had in common was that they all wanted to impose a monopoly on the trade in nutmegs and mace. The Dutch were the most relentless of all, sending fleets to the islands again and again, with the intention of forcing treaties on their inhabitants. The islanders were few in number. There were only about 15,000 of them altogether, but they resisted so stubbornly that in 1621, the Governor-General of the Dutch East Indies, Jan Pietersen Koen, who is remembered today for coining the aphorism, "No war without trade, no trade without war," decided that the Banda problem needed a final solution. The islands needed to be emptied of their inhabitants. Once the Bandanese were gone, settlers and slaves would be brought in to create a new plantation economy in the archipelago. So, in February 1621, Koen led a Dutch fleet to the Banda Islands and issued orders to the inhabitants to abandon their villages and leave their homes. Naturally, the Bandanese did not comply. So in April 1621, Koen implemented someone wants remote control of my screen. Is that something that I should allow?
No.
Okay. Sorry about that. But, people are always trying to do these things. So in February 1621, Koen led a Dutch fleet to the Banda Islands and issued orders to the inhabitants to abandon their villages and leave their homes. Naturally, they did not comply. So in April 1621, Koen implemented his final solution. On his orders, in a period of a few weeks, the Dutch effectively eliminated the entire population of the islands. Several thousand were killed, several thousand died of starvation or disease, and the rest were enslaved and deported. In short, within a few months, the Bandanese, once a proud and enterprising trading community, had ceased to exist as a people. The world had been brought to an end in a span of less than 10 weeks. The Bandanese were thus among the earliest victims of a scourge that now threatens to engulf the entire planet, the so-called resource curse. How should the story of the nutmeg be told? And does it even matter? After all, what happened? I'm sorry, I keep getting these requests for taking control of my screen. And obviously, I'm not going to do that.
Can you just say the name? Is someone specific asking?
It's obviously a pseudonym, Jerkoff.
Okay, we will get rid of that person.
Yes, please do. How should the story of the nutmeg be told, and does it even matter? After all, what happened in the Banda Islands was merely one instance. What happened in the Banda Islands was merely one instance of a history of colonization that was then unfolding on a vastly larger scale on the other side of the earth in the Americas. It might be said that the page has been turned on that chapter of history, that the 21st century bears no resemblance to that long ago time when plants and botanical matter could decide the fate of human beings, that humanity has freed itself from the earth and the soil and is now in an era when human-made goods take precedence over the products of the earth. What possible bearing could this centuries-old story have on our times? The trouble is, none of the above is true. Humanity today is even more dependent on botanical matter than it was 300 or 500 or even 5 millennia ago, and not just for food. Most people in the world today are completely dependent in every aspect of their lives on energy that comes from long buried carbon. And what are coal, oil, and natural gas, except fossilized forms of botanical matter? The sales of this fossilized botanical matter amount to over $10 trillion annually, and the trading and transporting of fossil fuels generates another $3 trillion. No human commodity even comes close to commanding so large a share of global trade and shipping. If anything, it was in the pre-modern era that manufactured goods like textiles and porcelain accounted for a greater share of global trade. The truth is that human beings have never been more dependent on the Earth's provisions, botanical matter most of all, than they are today. The idea that modern man has freed himself from the planet is not just absurd, it is a dangerous delusion. Affluence today is equivalent to fossil fuel dependence. That is something that has been shown and proved many, many times. Once the reality of humanity's ever-increasing servitude to the earth is acknowledged, the story of the Bandanese no longer seems as so distant from our present predicament. To the contrary, the continuities between the two are so pressing and powerful that it could even be said that the fate of the Banda Islands might be read as a template for the present, if only we knew how to tell that story. The horror of the story of the Bandanese lies in no small part in the fact that the narrative of their elimination from the land revolves around a tree, a species of incomparable value, gifted to the islands by the region's volcanic ecology. The nutmeg was literally the tree of life for the Bandanese. Yet what can be said about the role of the nutmeg tree in this story? It is certainly true that the history of the archipelago cannot be narrated without reference to the tree, but it cannot for that reason be said that the tree authored or decided the fate of the Bandanese. These questions bring us to the limits of a certain way of telling stories about the past. The empirical, documentary methods of historical scholarship depend critically on language, literacy, and writing. Its evidence comes primarily from written records. In the stories it tells, entities that lack language figure only as backdrops against which human dramas are enacted. Nutmegs, cloves, and volcanoes may figure in these stories, but they cannot themselves be actors in the stories that historians tell, nor can they tell stories of their own. For Moluccans, on the other hand, as for many others who live in seismic zones, trees, flowers, and volcanoes are makers of history as well as tellers of stories. For the Bandanese, the landscapes, forests, and trees of their islands were places of dwelling that were enmeshed with human life in ways that were imaginative as well as material. The landscape did not exist solely to produce nutmeg. They sang songs about nutmegs and volcanoes and told stories about them. For Jan Koen and the Dutch East India Company, on the other hand, the trees, volcanoes, and landscapes of the Bandas had no meaning except as resources that could be harnessed to generate profit. For them, the trees and volcanoes that were woven into the songs of the Bandanese contained nothing in excess of their utility. The idea that a volcano could make meaning would have been for them merely superstition or even idolatry. Nor in the eyes of Dutch colonists was there any intrinsic connection between the Bandanese and the landscape they inhabited. They could simply be replaced by workers and managers who would transform their archipelago into a nutmeg-producing factory. This was a radically new way of envisioning the Earth as a vast machine made of inert particles in ceaseless motion. Even in Europe, the mechanistic vision of the world had only just begun to take shape in the 17th century, and then too only among elites. The fact that it happened against the backdrop of the European conquest of the Americas was not coincidental. It was in the wake of the subjugation of those continents that educated upper-class European men began to think of themselves as the subduers of all they surveyed, even in their own countries, and especially within that domain they conceived of as nature, an inert repository of resources which, in order to be improved, needed to be expropriated, no matter whether from Amerindians or European peasants. But this conception of nature did not apply only to non-human resources. People like Amerindians, Africans, Asians were similarly thought to belong to nature and were therefore also thought to be eligible for appropriation, enslavement, or extermination. Just like non-human resources, these humans too were regarded as mute, brutish, and devoid of agency. Today, not even the most die-hard positivist or mechanist would claim, at least explicitly, that there exists any category of humans who are mute or devoid of agency. But what about non-humans? There are many people in the world, and many, if not most of them perhaps, are indigenous, who continue to believe that plants, trees, animals, and even geological features are neither mute nor lacking in agency. But very few of these people belong to dominant global elites, and even fewer are located within the academy. For historians, economists, and other academics, non-human entities are still seen as inert and incapable of agency. In that sense, their way of enframing the world is still very much founded on the ideologies that rose to dominance in the wake of European empires in the 17th century. One notable feature of these ideologies is that they were radically centered on humanity. Human beings were regarded as being exalted over all other creatures, and the principal mark of their superiority lay in their possession of language and in their ability to make and understand meaningful statements. Within this view, only humans possessed the ability to speak, to act intentionally, and not least, to make history. These views were, it should be noted, largely held by elite European men. Across the planet, there were many, many people who believed, and still do, that there exist some or many kinds of beings who can and do speak. Nor are these views held only by non-Westerners. Even in Europe and other parts of the West, there have always existed many people who believed that humans were not the only beings endowed with souls and the capacity to make and understand meaning. But such people were regarded by elite Westerners as superstitious and deluded primitives and animists. To be civilized, within quotes, was to accept that the earth is inert and machine-like, and that no aspect of it, in principle, can elude human knowledge. Indeed, the very idea that other than human beings had souls or could speak was regarded as a sign of savagery that needed to be suppressed or eradicated, with extreme violence if necessary. So to this day, it is taken for granted by many, if not most, educated people that a question such as, can non-humans speak, is ipso facto absurd. Yet the matter is not as easily settled as it may first appear. For the question, can non-humans speak, conjures up a number of other queries. For example, can all humans speak? The answer is clearly no, because there are many human beings who are indisputably human, but who, for reasons of disability, age, mental condition, or simply choice, do not and cannot speak. Conversely, it is also true that a person who is unable to use language does not, for that reason, cease to be a human being. Similarly, we might ask, who are the humans who speak? What, for example, is the process of elimination that allows me to speak today rather than, say, the driver of a taxi? The moment we ask this question, it becomes evident that the act of speaking is also an act of silencing or privileging some forms of communication over others. Yet another fundamental question that arises in this regard is who and what is human? Today, the definition of human is often tied to the binomial name Homo sapiens, the wise ape, a taxonomic category that was invented by Linnaeus in 1758. The date tells us a great deal about the phrase Homo sapiens. For example, that it was born of the European Enlightenment amidst the emergence of what we now regard as science. According to the Linnaean definition, all members of the class Homo sapiens are a single species. Yet Linnaeus also divided the species into various subspecies, according to geography and physical attributes. In other words, even as the Enlightenment was producing the idea of the human as a single species, it was also negating that idea. Hence, many, if not most, Enlightenment philosophers believed that there existed a natural hierarchy within the species Homo sapiens, so that some races and classes were more human than others. We cannot forget that the New World, for example, was represented by its European conquerors as a, I quote, world without humans, and that it was this that allowed them to attempt the mass extermination of indigenous peoples. So we are confronted with the paradox that the invention of the human went hand in hand with a process of disaggregation whereby the faculties of speech and reasoning were not regarded as being distributed equally among all humans. Needless to add, these beliefs held powerful sway through much of the 19th and 20th centuries and are with us even today in vestigial forms. So let us consider a contrary possibility. One in which living things of many kinds are able, if not to speak, then at least to articulate certain aspects of their being. This is not a far-fetched idea. We now know that trees in a forest are able to communicate with each other in certain circumstances. They can send help in the form of carbon to ailing members of their group, and they can warn each other about pestilence and disease. It is now thought that certain plants can even emit sounds that are inaudible to the human ear, but are audible to some other living things. This suggests that one problem with the question, can the non-human speak, lies in its wording, which rests on a term, speak, that is pinned to language, a human attribute. In that they lack this attribute, trees could be said to be mute. But in that we lack the ability to communicate as trees do, could it not be said that for a tree it is the human who is mute? So whose definition prevails? The answer to this is again far from obvious. It may seem to us that because we have the ability to chop down a tree, that it is we who decide who speaks and who is mute. But many trees have much longer lifespans than human beings. Some live for over 1,000 years. If indeed trees possessed ways of reasoning, we can be sure that they would be calibrated to a completely different timescale, perhaps one in which humans may go extinct or experience catastrophic mortality events. Such a world would be one in which trees could flourish as never before, on soil that will have been enriched by billions of decomposing human bodies. So it may appear self-evident to us that we are the gardeners who get to decide what happens to trees. Yet, from a different timescale, it might appear equally evident that it is the trees that are gardening us. But perhaps this is all wrong. After all, trees and human beings are not, or not just, adversaries competing for space. They are also linked by innumerable forms of cooperation. Perhaps what is at fault here is the very idea of a single species. We now know that the human body contains vast numbers of microorganisms of various kinds. We know that we could not function without their presence. We know that microorganisms influence our moods, emotions, and ability to reason. So if it is true that the human ability to speak can only be actualized in the presence of other species, can it really be said that the faculty of speech is exclusive to humans? As Anat Singh points out in her brilliant new book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, it seems increasingly that species do not evolve singly, but rather in close intimacy with other organisms. She cites the example of certain animals that are only able to develop fully when they encounter certain specific microorganisms that are not a part of their own genetic makeup. These animals must encounter those bacteria in the world. Without those encounters, which are in effect historical encounters, they are unable to fully realize their potential. But could it not also be said of humans too, that the presence of certain other species in certain specific moments of encounter enable them to transcend their own limitations? Consider one landmark moment in the history of human consciousness, the enlightenment of the Buddha. This event occurred while the Buddha was meditating under a Bodhi tree. Within the Buddhist tradition, for more than 2,000 years, the presence of this tree has been inseparable from that moment. This is not to say that the tree transmits illumination, or even that it is an active participant in the process. Nor is it at all the case that everyone who meditates under a Bodhi tree will achieve enlightenment. Yet it has long been accepted by many millions of people that a trans-species encounter at a specific moment, at a specific historical juncture, was essential to the enlightenment of one particular human, Prince Siddhartha Gautama. And the Buddha himself believed the tree to be essential to his attainment of Nibbana, which is why millions of Buddhists consider the Bodhi tree to be sacred to this day. What does this tell us? It tells us, first of all, that certain kinds of trans-species associations cannot be approached as though they were processes or relationships. They are precisely encounters or events that occur at specific moments in time and are not repeatable. This means that such encounters can only be approached historically by attending to the circumstances in which they occur. Secondly, it tells us that an awareness of the possibility of trans-species encounters of this sort has always existed among humans. For we need only think of the traditions that surround St. Francis of Assisi to recognize that there are many other examples of such associations. So the true question then is not whether the non-human can speak, but rather when and how did some humans. And let it be noted that these humans are mainly people with university educations. How is it that these humans came to believe that other species are essentially brutes, incapable of articulation and agency? The best-known brute in literature is, of course, Shakespeare's Caliban, who makes his entrance in The Tempest, which is famously an allegory of colonialism. The name Caliban is probably an anagram for cannibal, a word which would originally have referred to a group of Amerindians. Because of the affinity between L, N, and R, the tribe has been referred to variously as Calib, Carib, and Canib. In The Tempest's dramatis personae, Caliban is listed as a savage and deformed slave, and the grotesqueness of his appearance is a recurrent theme in the play. Yet the essence of Caliban's brutishness does not lie in his external appearance. That is indeed the import of the famous lines in which Prospero reminds Caliban of the most important gift that he has given him. I pitied thee. I took pains to make thee speak, taught thee each hour one thing or another, when thou didst not, savage, know thine own meaning, but wouldst gabble like a thing most brutish. I endowed thy purposes with words that made them known. The essence of Caliban's brutishness lies, then, in his lack of language, in his inability to make meaning, even though he possesses the faculty of speech. Prospero's words, I endowed thy purposes with words that made them known, go straight to the heart of the European colonizers' framing of the colonized. Despite possessing the uniquely human faculty of speech, brutish humans cannot produce meaning. Their sounds amount to mere gabble until the colonizer gives them words, which endows them at last with the ability to make meaning. Until then, no matter that they have tongues, voices, and languages, brutes are effectively mute, like nature itself, which also makes sounds but produces no meaning. In this view of the world, the sounds of nature are not equivalent to utterances. They are the products of mechanical responses and reactions. The muteness of nature and the muteness of the brute are reflections of each other. As a process, then, the muting of a large part of humanity by European colonizers cannot be separated from the simultaneous muting of nature. Joyce Chaplin, the historian, writes, I quote, demystifying nature, displaying bodily strength, and using technology all became measures of colonial power, unquote. Colonization was thus not merely a process of establishing dominion over human beings. It was also a process of subjugating and reducing to muteness an entire universe of beings that was once thought of as having agency, powers of communication, and the ability to make meaning. These beings included animals, trees, volcanoes, nutmegs. There are few more poignant accounts of this process of dual muting of colonized humans as well as non-humans than the words of Walking Buffalo, a Stoney Indian chief from Canada. Did you know the trees talk? I'm quoting his words here. Did you know the trees talk? Well, they do. They talk to each other, and they'll talk to you if you listen. Trouble is, white people don't listen. They never learned to listen to the Indians, so I don't suppose they listen to other voices in nature. Unquote. These mutings were essential to the process of establishing Western rule over the earth. Because, as the philosopher Akhil Bilgrami observes, in order to see something as mere resource, I quote, we first need to see it as brute, as something that makes no normative demands of practical and moral engagement with us, unquote. It is by rendering a vast continuum of human and non-human beings into brutes that the colonizer turns them into resources to be used as slaves, servants, and commodities. This entire continuum was also believed to be subject to the natural laws that condemn certain species to extinction or extermination. I think I'd better stop there, shouldn't I? Since we need to leave time for the questions.
Yeah, this is Emily Amitav. Why don't we move into our conversation before
Absolutely.
the Q&A
Let's
from
do
the
that.
audience?
Absolutely.
Well, you've given us so much to think about.
Thank you.
You unshare, Amitav. Could you unshare the...
Unshare, sure. Just give me a moment. There we are. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can't see Emily though.
Here I am.
Ah, I can see you now. Yes.
I wish to first to congratulate you on the publication of The Nutmeg's Curse, Amitav. It's a wonderful book.
Thank you so much.
And it does so much, as I'm sure the audience can tell from your lecture. There's a lot going on, so many ties that Amitav is making in this book between colonialism and climate change, deep historical understanding, and beautifully written text.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I have the privilege of leading a discussion coming up next month with a climate writers reading group that I participate in, along with some climate writers, including Meera Subramanian, who wrote A River Runs Again, Mian Christ, who is finishing a book about childbirth and climate change, Royce Granton, whose most recent book is We're Doomed, Now What?, Elizabeth Rush, who wrote Rising, about sea level rise, and Bathsheba Demuth, who wrote a beautiful book called Floating Coast.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yes, I know this is a book-loving audience, so I've mentioned these authors. Also, just to segue into my first question for you, because so many of us, including some of those I've just named, who are in the game of creative writing, incorporating the climate crisis in our work, have really been inspired by your text, The Great Derangement.
Thank you.
To incorporate and not ignore, lest we be considered deranged by future readers, perhaps including our own children, for ignoring the planetary crisis in our work. We feel increasingly the urgent need to address it as a theme and a driving force. So I know one such writer that both of us admire is Ben Ehrenreich, whose book, Desert Notebooks, I'm sure Amitav and I both recommend to the audience. Would you care to mention for the audience, who all consist of readers, any other writers or books that you'd recommend that touch on the climate crisis in interesting, innovative, or provocative ways?
I think you've mentioned several of them already. Ben Ehrenreich's book, I think is just wonderful, and it was really sort of an inspiration to me as I was writing my own book. The framing of it, he and I share so many perspectives on that. Nathaniel Rich's books, I would say, are really terrific. There are so many others, actually, Emily. I hesitate to name any for fear of leaving anyone out. But of course, Elizabeth Colbert is such a great writer, and I do think one of the writers whose work sort of tends to get left out of this entire framework is Annie Proulx. Her Barkskins, I think, really does, in a way, what I and Ben and all of us are trying to do, which is to place, to look at the deep history of ecological change, especially in North America. So there's such a wide range of writers, and there are more and more wonderful books coming out every day, really. Young writers, so many of them are writing really amazing books. So let me not limit the list for fear of leaving anybody out.
Well, that's kind of you. But of course, one of your slides in the PowerPoint presentation of the trees communicating underground, as well as that wonderful quote you shared by Walking Buffalo, did you know that trees can speak? Reminds me also of Overstory by Richard Flowers,
Yes.
a book I know that you also appreciate and enjoy.
Oh, very much. I'm a great admirer of that book. Yes, absolutely.
I wonder if we might also, particularly because at least in the United States, we're in this holiday season, and the nutmeg actually is a spice many of us use in Thanksgiving and Christmas around this time in pumpkin pie as an ingredient, as well as sweet potato pie. So it's a spice that I think many of us are reaching for right now. And thinking about this season too, in terms of consumerism and overconsumption in the United States, especially surrounding Christmas shopping. I recently became aware of an interesting book by Aja Barber. It's called Consumed, The Need for Collective Change, Colonialism, Climate Change, and Consumption.
How do you spell that?
Consumed. Aja, her name is, I'll put it in the chat, Aja Barber. But anyway, I'm teaching a climate writing class at City College, which is in Harlem. And I showed my students on Monday night a short clip of Aja speaking about her book on NBC, a little segment in which there were also many images shown of the consequences of our overconsumption. One striking image was just how many clothes, because of fast fashion, how many clothes we think when we are donating, for example, after we've outgrown them, wind up, we bring them to a charity shop, perhaps thinking, okay, I'm doing a good thing, but then they wind up in Ghana, for example, in the ocean, or just littering, and that often people aren't thinking about where their trash ends up. I appreciate some of the ties she's making between colonialism, consumption, and the climate crisis. And I wonder if any other historians, writers, or thinkers come to mind who have done the work to draw links such as you're doing between colonialism and climate change.
Yes, there are many. But I think most of all, I would say really that it's Native American thinkers and historians who've done most of that work, honestly. Mm-hmm. Because so much of this, I would cite first of all, Nick Estes. He's written a wonderful book called Our Past is Your Future. A lot of it is about the Standing Rock movement. But mostly it's about indigenous resistance to the fossil fuel economy. Mm-hmm. But there are many such books. But I really feel that in many ways, Native American thinkers have just been so ahead of the curve in connecting these dots.
Yeah, I wonder if you could speak. This is something that's come up in my climate writing class with students. Many of whom are from a younger generation. How do you balance hope and despair in writing along these themes, given the grim picture? How do you balance hope and despair on the page?
Well, what can I say? The picture is very grim, and it's getting more and more so every day. Those who believed that the liberal world order, so to speak, or the liberal international order would find a solution, we really have come away very, very disappointed from this Glasgow summit, COP26, which really has been such a profound failure. But I think we have to remember that, let's take one example of the planetary crisis that we are in. I mean, one aspect of it, which is precisely this pandemic. A lot of terrible things have happened in this pandemic, of course, and there's no denying that. But also, many of us have found other things. We've discovered what's important to us. We've found new ways of finding meaning in life. People have discovered a new work-life balance. People have discovered that so many unimportant things really need not concern us. I mean, that they were just chasing things like guinea pigs on wheels. So there is that. And I do feel that the deepening planetary crisis does really remind us of all these things. But I think most of all, we just have to start accepting that the future is not going to be like the past. There is not going to be any new normal. And that things are going to get much, much worse. I think there can be really very little doubt about that.
I believe this quote came up in your talk just now, but it was also something I underlined in your text when you reframe colonialism as a project of muting and subduing the earth. Can you say more about that in the context of climate change, where we are now?
Well, of course, I mean, the whole Enlightenment conception of history was itself one in which only those humans who had established dominion over nature, who had established control over nature, were thought to be agents of history. And these humans were, of course, overwhelmingly white Westerners, and most of all, white Western men. So, that's a curious thing. For a couple of centuries now, especially in North America, people thought that they'd gained complete control over nature through dam building projects, through deforestation, through really remaking the environment in ways where the environment was made to resemble another continent far, far away, which is Europe. So it was really a project of terraforming in some sense. But when we look around us now, what do we see? We see exactly this, that all these projects are coming undone. In America today, dams are being dismantled, at a great rate, because it's been discovered that dams may be great in the short run, but in the long run, they can be disastrous. Similarly, what we see in California, for example, California is one of the most intensively terraformed parts of the planet, also one of the richest parts of the planet. But California is not able to hold the impacts of climate change at bay, quite the contrary. So this is the curious thing. I mean, many people speak of this era as the Anthropocene. But what we see actually is that this is precisely the era when the Earth has decided to tell us that, no, you're not in charge. In a way, it's like dealing with an elephant. I mean, a human being can sort of stick a spear in the elephant's flank and run away. But it's not, because an elephant is a big thing and it takes a long time to get up. But once it comes after you, you're not going very far. And that seems to be the case today.
Yeah, what happens when you keep poking the earth?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
There are many questions in the chat coming up from the audience, and I would like to pose some of them to you. I'm going to scroll through. Yes, one person has asked also if some of the book references that Amitabh and myself have made could be provided in the chat, and
yes.
maybe I'll ask Joel if he can recall some of the books we've referenced.
Sure.
to list those, because I know this is a book loving audience. Okay, this is a question from Julie. Were the colonizers conscious of what they were doing? Or is it only in retrospect that we see how they claimed all other life brutish in order to subjugate it?
Yes, the colonizers were entirely conscious of it. In fact, if you look at the early, 17th century records of New England and so on, the colonizers rejoice in what they say. They're making a place which they regard as ugly in its original form because it had swamps and forests and so on. They rejoice in making it look more and more like our dear beloved England, as they say repeatedly. So they're certainly aware of the ecological and environmental dimensions of what they were doing. They were also aware of how their particular environmental impacts unfolded and made Native American lives impossible, for example, especially in the use of livestock. This is something that de Tocqueville discusses at great length. He says that, a European family has only to settle in the wilderness with a few cows and a few pigs, and within a few years it drives away all the native livestock, and it makes the native animals, and it makes native lives actually very precarious, if not absolutely unlivable. So yes, I think the colonists they had completely in mind this idea of changing the environment they had come to, and they worked at it. Of course, one of the factors that is very controversial is what was the role of disease in all this. And for a long time, there was a school of history which held that disease just spread by itself. There was no There was no human agency involved in the spread of disease. But increasingly, it seems that this is not the case. The idea that Native American populations were exceptionally vulnerable or that they didn't have immunities has not stood up to further research. In fact, research shows that in many cases, Native American populations did develop immunities very quickly. But what actually happened is that it was other factors that made Native American populations incredibly vulnerable, which was violence, being herded into small camps, being put into circumstances where a disease would quite intentionally spread. We all know the stories of the infected blankets and so on, but there were many other stories like that. So, even say, for example, in Virginia in the 17th century, in the early settlements, European populations, white populations, perished at a great rate because they too were suffering from poverty, malnutrition, and so on. So, in those circumstances of other stressors, disease spreads very fast. So, in many ways, this idea that disease spreads without human agency, as it were, is really just a way of skipping around the issues.
This question is from Jenny. Tell us why we should be hopeful about surviving the climate change challenge.
If I tell you why I'm hopeful, you'll think I'm nuts or a crazy person or whatever. But I think my hope, such as it is, comes from the increasing indications that we do actually live in a multiverse or a pluriverse. And maybe indigenous thinkers were right all along, that there are these other beings amongst us who will try to rescue us from ourselves.
I'll share, you just made me think of one thing also that has made me feel a little bit hopeful. This is a personal anecdote, but I'd like to share it with Jenny and the audience. I just completed a grant this week with a colleague of mine in the sciences who works on studying ocean systems and wants me to take me along with her on a research trip this summer to the Yukon River in the Arctic. She's studying the Arctic, which is the fastest warming part of the planet, as many people know. But she tells me, and I was so pleased to learn this, that now when you're making these big grant proposals to places like NASA and NSF, they really are urging people to seek traditional ecological knowledge from indigenous peoples. So you're not allowed any longer to really helicopter in to take samples without asking for knowledge and wisdom from the native population, and also to ask them what they would like to be studying about their local habitat and environment. That made me hopeful because it made me feel like maybe there's something anti-colonial in thinking about redressing, ignoring, or treating as brutish peoples who have other perspectives that we really need to be learning from right now.
Emily, you must be aware that a lot of indigenous thinkers have been very critical of this idea of TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, as they call it. Because that again is another form of appropriation often, because what in effect they're doing is that they're treating what they call TEK as though it were knowledge in the same term, or that it had the same intents and purposes as like the Western technical knowledge, and that's often not the case. In fact, the ways in which indigenous peoples around the earth have related to their environments is always primarily, first and foremost, through stories. Through dreams, through visions, through completely non-technical things. So the idea that there is such a domain as the technical that is separate from the imaginative is itself a deep violation of these principles, in my view. And that is why I think it's so important. Storytelling is so important to this. Unless we can restore the imaginative world of multiple beings, around us. I think it's just a hopeless thing to think of this. There's a very good a book coming out. I think it's already out by a Native American scientist called Le Boiron. I'm afraid I'm just forgetting the name right now, but it's a really excellent critique of many of these ideas. He's of course a scientist, but also very deeply steeped in traditional knowledge. But I think perhaps the most powerful book of that kind is Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. Really an absolute classic.
I was about to mention that too. Yes.
I learned so much from it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book.
Well, yes, and it actually I think your talk and your book are in dialogue with
very much
with Braiding Sweetgrass in terms of thinking of natural beings in nature as kin, right? As she says,
yes.
there's something barbaric actually in referring to a tree as it.
That's right.
And
That's
her term from her language is ki. It has, it's a pronoun that gives personhood to animacy to the natural world, and I think that book has taught so many of us. But I share your view about the dangers of co-opting traditional ecological knowledge and also folding it into a framework that it ought not to be folded into or subjugated or pressured into. And so I agree, storytelling is really essential. I feel I want to be on the Yukon River as a storyteller as well, to learn the stories from the people who live there.
Sure.
In relation to this crisis. Also because, and this is for you, Jenny, as well, I think we can look for hope from peoples who understand that this is not the first existential crisis humans have survived.
Yes,
the climate writer, essayist Mary Anais Heglar has a wonderful essay called Climate Change Ain't the First Existential Crisis, which I recommend. Just thinking about, the histories of enslaved people in this country, as well as Native peoples who, have survived the apocalypse before and have a different perspective on the end of the world. So,
if I may just mention another writer there, a very young, a very brilliant Native American writer who's been publishing a series of articles in The Atlantic and elsewhere, Julian Brave Noisecat.
Oh, yeah.
I think his work is really terrific, and he's just been doing wonderful stuff.
Beautiful writing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a question from Ada. It's particular to The Nutmeg's Curse. What is the meaning behind the title, and how does it relate to the theme of the book?
Well, the nutmeg tree is an amazing tree, a miraculous tree, really. And it existed only on a tiny cluster of islands, that is the Banda Islands. And the Banda Islands really are, as you saw on these maps, I mean, they're just a tiny little archipelago, very hard to find on any map of the world. But they had this amazing tree. And for millennia, this tree made them rich and prosperous. They became an enterprising trading people with connections around the known world. This tree was literally their tree of life. It was a great gift from their volcano, from their earth, from their forests. But in the end, this tree also led to the utter extermination, to their elimination from their own lands. So, the tree was a great blessing until the great blessing turned into a curse. One of the first examples of the resource curse, which actually also led to one of the first early modern genocides. So, if we think of that as an analogy, our Earth is also a wonderful, wonderful place. It's a wonderful planet. It's the only one we have. It's given us so many blessings. It's just it teems with wonders and rarities and astonishing things. And yet, what we've done to it is becoming a profound threat to our very existence. So in many ways, the climate crisis could also be seen as the globalization of the resource curse, which is how I see it. So it is in that sense that, the nutmeg's curse is in fact an analogy for the planetary crisis.
Thank you. The next question is from Suman. We've been seeing here in this country that we're still slowly working towards the political will and results to start addressing climate change and fossil fuel consumption. What is your impression about the popular and political will to do so in India? I ask partly because my family's roots are also in Kolkata.
I think, as over here, it's a very deeply divided. It's a very deeply divided country. India is, and so is the United States in this regard. The problem really in India is that the people who are feeling the worst impacts of climate change often tend to be the poorest people who live in the forests, the people who are lowest down on the social ladder. So their concerns are very easy to ignore. And it's very easy for political elites to tell them, no, for the sake of development, we have to have more coal-powered plants. We have to have more mining, more extraction. But in fact, if you think about the hundreds of thousands, even millions of forest peoples, Adivasis and so on, who are losing their livelihoods, who are losing their traditional territories, what does it matter to them if rich people who are already affluent in cities get some more electricity? They've lost their ways of life already. Over here, of course, it's a very different scenario. Climate change has become incredibly politicized, as vaccinations have become politicized. So, in effect, every issue that arises here now gets caught in this intense political divide, and it seems very hard to think of futures, to think of any kind of future where people can come together on these matters. So, really, the politics is what has become truly intractable. It's not that solutions don't exist either in India or the United States. We can think of many kinds of solutions, but it's the politics which has become really completely intractable.
Thank you. Here's a question from Sarah. Hi, Emily and Amitav. Responding to an earlier part of the conversation about incorporating climate change in our written work, what do you think is the most pressing, meaningful, effective message that needs to be communicated by writers?
Well, Emily, you asked this question as well, so why don't you go first?
I'm going to refer again to The Great Derangement as a book that was really eye-opening for me as a writer, insofar as it made me feel that I would be deranged if I didn't write about it. I don't know that I could say what is the most pressing or meaningful, effective message. I'm still at a stage as a writer where I feel like breaking silence is crucial, even just to acknowledge what's happening and to write about it and study what's happening in my local habitat. And that is because there is a wide gap between the amount of people, at least in this country, who are concerned or terrified about the climate crisis and the amount of people who are even talking about it at all. And of course, political will is also driven by politicians' understanding of what is meaningful to their constituents. So we need to be vocal in all of our, not just writers, but all of us, I think, need to be vocal about not silent about it. So we need to be educated and we need to participate in activism in whatever ways. I've heard Amitav say that even writing can be activism. This is what we do. This is what Amitav and I do. And so enfolding it in the work then becomes an active act. I don't know if that's an answer or a non-answer.
Oh, it's a great answer. And actually, Emily, you've written some wonderful pieces on climate change. So, you're being too modest, I think. You've written some amazing pieces. For myself, I would say, that the whole idea that there is one message that everyone should put out is really very misleading. Climate change is the biggest thing that's, in a sense, that's ever happened on this planet. Obviously, people are going to have many different kinds of opinions. And I think we should welcome these opinions. We should welcome, there's going to be 1 million points of view, 10 million, billions of points of view. And so there should be. I don't think anyone should try to say that you should only take this position or you should only take the other position. I think that's a mistake that especially, university experts make sometimes in trying to dictate what should be the precise tone of the discourse on climate change, what should be the precise content of it. It's really, you just can't decide those things for people. Writers are notoriously individualistic. We all see things in our own ways. And this is something we should encourage and we should embrace.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. This one is from Anwita. And it begins with a quote. Quote, "How can anyone expect that developing countries make promises about phasing out coal and fossil fuel subsidies? Developing countries still have to deal with their poverty reduction agenda." End quote. This was spoken by India's Environment Minister, Bhupender Yadav. Here's the question, how do you make sense of this proclamation? Is it a failure of India or that of COP26?
Look, I think it's absolutely true what he's saying. If there were any kind of fairness and equity in the world's poor would have the right to use a certain quantity of energy for their absolutely basic needs. I think that goes without saying. Any kind of movement towards climate justice entails that. And we have many solutions, many formulae for how that could be worked out so that people in the West could reduce their dependence on fossil fuels at the same time as a certain quantity of fossil fuels are made available to very poor people across the global South. So I think that argument on the face of it cannot be faulted. At the same time, I do think that the elites of the global South, like the minister that you quoted, often make these arguments in bad faith, because what they're not saying is that the fossil fuels that they are opening up will actually not benefit the very poor of the country. They'll benefit in the first place crony capitalists who get to own these mines and operate these mines. It's not going to benefit the poor workers who work in these mines, or of course the forest peoples who are going to be evicted in order to make space for these mines. It's not even going to provide any benefits really to the rural poor. So that's the question, really. When these arguments are made, what is the proof that is shown to us that these benefits from expanded use of fossil fuels within the global South are actually going to benefit those who need it most, as opposed to the elites of the global South, which actually have a carbon footprint which is no different from that of Westerners. So this is the terrible problem that we face, really. How do we work this out? So these arguments are good arguments, but are made for the wrong reason often.
Final question. I wish we had time for all the questions. We have time for one last one. This is from Narendran. Thank you for this, Amitabh. Can you say a little bit more about the connections between the desire to dominate and the desire to consume? With regard to climate change, the emphasis has been on consumption. While I very much appreciate your emphasis on domination and colonialism, do you see connections between the two?
I think the two are inseparable. The reason why the fossil fuel economies were put in place were ultimately reasons of geopolitical dominance. And this is inseparable from the fossil fuel economy to the present day. The fossil fuel economies actually have bolstered Western power for more than a century. And that is ultimately, in my view, the greatest obstacle to a transition to alternative energy at scale. So, dominance and violence are fundamental to this. And unfortunately, those are the aspects of the problem that are not discussed.
Thank you so much, Amitav. Some people in the
Thank
chat
you.
want to know if this will be recorded and shared later, and perhaps Joel could let us know.
First of all, thank you both so much. Thank you, Emily, for your wonderful questions and moderating. Thank you, Amitav, for this tremendously broad but also focused talk tonight. It was
Thank
wonderful
you.
to hear you
Thank
think
you for
out loud.
having me.
And yes, we have recorded an archival version of this on our Facebook page, which we will send out in the RSVP along